In reviewing Mass Effect Andromeda, I need to address the reactions the game received. The early reviews were mixed, and the player reactions from the first 10 hours were disappointing at best. I rarely get sucked into hype for any game, but without even playing it, it felt like I'd been let down. It was an awful feeling. Although I wasn't angry, it was easy to understand why people were. And then I played it. Other people clearly didn't get the Andromeda they wanted, but I did. That's not to say there aren't issues with the game. The animations are generally poor, the game isn't well optimized and didn't run particularly well even after fiddling with settings. I also experienced multiple crashes during cutscenes, doors that wouldn't open, and many conversations with people off screen. Those are only a few of the problems the game has. But despite all of those issues, I've loved the 60 plus hours I've spent in game, because Andromeda gets a lot of things right. The first of those is the gameplay. The gunplay is more fluid than in any other Mass Effect. I never got tired of it. Each weapon has a heft to it that's very satisfying, and there's a decent amount of variety in the guns available too. Whatever style of combat you prefer, you're catered for, and experimenting with new gear and approaches is always rewarding. Where in previous Mass Effect games, you've had to choose a class and a playstyle before you've had a chance to actually play the game, in Andromeda you can freely switch to any class at any time. The result is a combat system that's far more flexible. The squad dynamics are boiled down to merely ordering your squad to attack a particular target or to move to a particular area. So while combat is vastly improved, the strategy of each encounter becomes far simpler. Personally, I like this change. Pausing the game to issue orders broke the pace of combat in the earlier games, but your mileage may vary here. The movement is also greatly improved and adds a lot to combat encounters, as well as general traversal. A good thing too, as you will find yourself running between objective markers all the time, but I'll get to that later. The major addition is the jetpack that offers a horizontal dash, a jump, and the ability to hover while shooting at enemies below you. With this improved movement comes a change in how levels are designed, with more going on vertically than in previous games. The other major improvement to how you move in the game is the Nomad. Where in the first game I loved the Mako despite its poor handling, I loved the Nomad unreservedly in Andromeda. If there was one element of the game I thought was basically perfect, it's the Nomad. Whether it's skidding across ice or speeding down a sand dune, it handles wonderfully, especially when it's got a few upgrades. All in all, the gameplay is pretty great. The narrative has a few issues though. On the one hand, I really like that the narrative isn't as driving or urgent as in previous games. It allows you to put off the main missions to explore side quests without feeling pressured by a major threat that renders smaller tasks insignificant. On the other hand, the Archon is a pretty boring antagonist, and as I alluded to before, quests will often have you jumping around multiple planets, serving only to highlight that the transitions between the planet and ship aren't as seamless as they think they are. Main missions never felt like a chore, but they don't feel as important as I'd like. Although it's a bit of a mixed bag, the narrative does feel immersive. Although there are elements that feel pretty generic and expected in a sci-fi story, the general premise of the Andromeda Initiative and setting up a home in another galaxy are meaty enough to carry the weaker elements. In most people's eyes, the focus of a BioWare game is on the characters, and here Andromeda is again a mixed bag. It could have used either more time in the writing room or a harsher hand in the editing suite. Perhaps the biggest issue is that the game seemingly assumes you want to love every character. As a result, they rarely, if ever, take risks with any of the characters, and they all seem to get along far more quickly than they should. There is a standout character though, and he demonstrates what every other character could have been. Jarl does have the significant advantage of being the only new species among your crew, but with the attention they paid to him as a result, his character feels fleshed out and consistent in ways that the others often don't. That said, I think people hold the original trilogy on a pedestal in regards to the characters, and I think that's a little foolish. While your favourite OT characters will certainly be better than most in Andromeda, there are many of the same missteps in Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3 as there are in Andromeda once you take off the rose-tinted glasses. While the NPCs aren't quite as good as those in the original trilogy, I actually like Ryder more than Shepard. Granted, I can't choose to be a renegade, only different shades of Paragon, but given that's the only way I played in 1 through 3, that wasn't a problem for me. For those that did enjoy being a bastard, there aren't many chances to do so, but for me the ability to be sarcastic and super nice to everyone is pretty fantastic. Under most circumstances, I'd be a little annoyed that the option to go renegade isn't really there anymore, but given your role as Pathfinder, it seems unrealistic to be selected if you were just a massive dick. Although it limits your options, I think the decision is justified by the narrative the game is trying to tell. Aesthetically, the game features some great decisions, alongside a few bad ones. I love the fairly minimal HUD, but hate how it's ruined by press Alt to look prompts and other visual junk. The design of each planet feels satisfyingly different, an impression that's bolstered by the way the Nomad handles differently, but the fauna all seems too similar. The remnant vaults on each planet feel different enough that they're all memorable, but share a design language that neither sits comfortably with Mass Effect's usual design, nor breaks from it far enough that it feels truly alien. All things considered, I generally like the look of the game, but it's an area that again could have used a little more polish. If the aesthetics needed more polish, then I think the soundtrack needed less. It's not that it's bad, far from it, but it lacks the personality of the original trilogy. Perhaps the intention was to steer clear from the occasionally cheesy moments in the previous soundtracks, but instead it feels rather flat and overly clean. It gives the impression of a wannabe Hans Zimmer soundtrack, at least on first listen. As I played through the game, the galaxy map and main menu tunes grew on me a lot, and there are a few good elements to the soundtrack in general. I actually like how sparse and slow it is most of the time, but it never really grabs attention the way the music could in the third game, nor does it have a refrain that drives the narrative as in the second. It plays it safe, and that's not what I think Mass Effect is about. So what is Mass Effect about? Well, Andromeda might have you believe it's the gameplay, and the fans will likely say it's the characters. I think it's about something else though. It's hard to define, but I think Mass Effect is about the world it's set in. The characters contribute to that world, of course, as do the narrative, the visuals, and the gameplay. But it is the whole that makes Mass Effect such an important series for me, not any individual part. I think that's why people had issues with Andromeda. No individual part really measured up to the first games, apart from the gameplay, and the whole that Mass Effect Andromeda added up to wasn't the same as what Mass Effects 2 and 3 added up to. It was nearly what Mass Effect 1 added up to though, and the first remains my favourite of the series. Andromeda didn't feel like a sequel to me. It didn't evolve from the direction Mass Effect was headed in 2 and 3, but rather went back to the original vision. It's almost a reboot. That's why I think if you play it the way it wants to be played, there's a lot of joy to be had in Andromeda, problems and all. Because this isn't Andromeda. This is. I don't like to end reviews with a score, and Mass Effect Andromeda is a great example of why. I love it, but I don't think it's technically up to scratch. So would a high score reflecting my experience, or a middling one reflecting the game itself make more sense? I personally think both are misleading, so instead I'll end this review the way I have many others, with a recommendation. If you like the exploration, the Mako, and the loot systems in the first Mass Effect, you'll probably think as highly of Andromeda as I do. If, however, you want the focus and driving narrative of Mass Effects 2 and 3, or a lack of polish would really bug you, maybe steer clear. All that said, if you've played Mass Effect Andromeda, I'd love to know what you thought. Was it as bad as many claim, or is it the diamond in the rough I think it is? Let me know in the comments below. Cheers, have a good one.